they barely explain anything. Like, they'll just give you a table and be like, here it is. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Gladly Global, where we show you how to study languages and our own journeys doing that. Welcome to the video. I'm constantly trying to get that shit to stay on the wall. Today I'm going to be doing a highly requested video, which is a Rivstart review, textbook review. I think I'm gonna get into reviewing more sources. I know you guys like that. As you can see, I am a patron of the Rivstart series. So I'm gonna talk about the entire series from the A1 to A2 to the B1 to C1 edition. Full disclosure, I used these books while I was studying with a professor. Originally, I did not go past the A1, A2 without a teacher. If you want to know how I was studying as a beginner or how I was studying with a teacher, you can check out my series on Swedish, on my Swedish journey so far, up in the cards up there. Okay. When someone asks me how they should start learning a new language, my answer is usually something along the lines of 1. Get a main resource to follow along, like something that gives you structure and takes away decision fatigue, keeps you, moving forward. And number 2 is to find places to sentence mine, like some native content where you can find examples or new words or something like that. So essentially you need a really good resource that is technical and places or interests that you have in that language to feed you with native content. So basically, sources of input. As simple as that sounds, we really shouldn't take number 1 lightly. For me, I'm actually super picky when choosing my textbooks, and I really analyze the use of a textbook. And when I do that, I usually go through the textbook with these 5 points: structure, comprehensibility, vocabulary relevance, self-study optimization, and my general feeling about the book, which sometimes has to do with like aesthetics and other things that are a little bit less important, or perhaps just everything on the whole. For our purposes and for my purposes, I always feel like it's really good to have a textbook that is made for self-study, even if you do have a tutor or a teacher, because you never know, like there may be periods that you want to study more on your own, that you don't have the money for a tutor at that time. Maybe the teacher is not that good at your school and you need to teach yourself. So I always feel like this is one of the most important aspects for a textbook for me. And if you guys don't know, like textbooks originally, so majority of textbooks are actually created for the teacher to have guidance when teaching students, so they're not actually aimed at students studying in the first place. So anyway, it then becomes important for you to really look at the textbook and see if it aligns with how you study as a student and your personal goals, because a lot of textbooks are created like for the academics or to get a job, or like there's a target audience for that textbook. I actually made a video about that a long time ago that I'll also put in the cards up above if you want to learn more about how I choose textbooks. Okay, so now to the Rivstart. Rivstart is an incredibly funny textbook series because I feel like the way that they structured the textbook is completely different from what I'm used to and outside of my expectations. I don't know if this is like more of a European language style thing, because learning Swedish was a very different experience for me as a language learner, having done Asian languages for a majority of my career as a language learner, as a polyglot. So I don't know if it's about that and that this is actually quite common. Structure was different for me, first of all, like what they decided to put in the workbooks versus what they decided to put in the textbooks was very different, and I was like, okay, interesting choice. But in addition to that, every book was also very different. So the structure did not hold true throughout the textbooks. So like I felt very differently about the A1, A2 workbook than I did about the B1, B2 workbook, and I felt very different about the A1, A2 textbook versus the C1, C2 textbook. Usually I would be able to just do like an overview review of the textbook series, but I sort of have to go more into each book, the workbook and textbook separately even, in this video, so it might be a little bit long. I have some of the textbooks digitally on my iPad because, as you guys know, I have a kind of nomadic traveling lifestyle and it's really difficult to bring a lot of textbooks different places, so I scanned my books and put them in here. I am encouraging you to buy original books and not to just steal them off the internet. A lot of people work hard to create textbooks and we should respect that. The A1-A2 textbook. So each chapter has a theme, a practical goal, and a technical goal. I think this is nice, but in practicality, you don't feel that embedded into the actual chapters themselves. Practically, each chapter is comprised of seemingly random exercises that teach a goal. As the book progresses, it incorporates more short text and dialogues, but there's no consistent pattern to this, so hit or miss. So personally, I did not love the A1-A2 textbook, and I did try to use this book on my own, like actually, before going to Swedish course in Sweden, and I wasn't able to get far with it at all. I ended up giving up using it and simply studying the vocabulary in the book and not actually studying the book itself. And the reason why I didn't really like it is because most of the exercises, like it's just random text exercises, not a lot of visual engagement. The exercises are quite like classroom based, like grab a friend and do this or da 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 da. And each chapter is also really like loosely structured, so there isn't like in most of the textbooks I like, there'll be like a passage and then a dialogue and then a vocabulary section, but it's not like that. It's just done based on how I guess the authors of the book felt like it could help you learn whatever the goals are that are listed in the beginning of like the summary, what is that called? However, I really loved the workbook. So it's kind of crazy because this is usually not the case at all. I generally hate workbooks. I don't like things that are super repetitive. When I was studying Japanese, Korean, and Chinese, I really despised workbooks, but in Swedish that was not the case. You guys can see, but I have like a lot of notes and bookmarks in my workbook because they had little summaries of all of the rules before giving you the exercise, and so the actual pages in this were more informative, more clear, with better structure than the textbook in my opinion. So if you're self-studying, you can maybe skip the textbook and just get the workbook. Just me. The only thing is that of course there are no reading exercises in this, so you'd have to supplement this with like some reading elsewhere, but there are a lot of better reading material than what's in the Rivstart textbook. So maybe I'm recommending, if you're A1, A2, I would totally definitely get this workbook, but then I would get a different textbook. I can't give a specific recommendation right now, but yeah, I would get a different textbook and this workbook. Next we have B1, B2 book that also has water damage. I did bring this book a lot of different places and I really liked the textbook for this one. So this is a weird aspect I was talking about where like I hated the A1, A2 textbook, but I loved the B1, B2 textbook. It was very content-based. There's lots of very interesting reading excerpts. Once again, the grammar explanation in this is pretty shitty, and you can find all the grammar explanations summarized and comprehensively in this one. For B1, B2, I think that Rivstart is perfect, so if you're around this level, then you can grab both of them. The read here, it literally just says read, and it's because I really liked the article, for example, and I wanted to come back to use it to practice, and the constraints of vocabulary make it perfect for level, as well as there's a lot of cultural tidbits. A lot of the writing pieces, like the texts inside here, are sourced from actual Swedish magazines, which is really cool. I love that. Some of these magazines I actually have a subscription to now because I saw them in the textbook, and there's a lot of really good conversation starters in this book, which is something that I appreciate because I've read a lot of textbooks where I literally have no interest in discussing anything in the textbook, but these ones have really great conversation starters, so I would recommend that. So the only thing is that the textbook is still optimized for a classroom setting. However, I do totally think that the content is good enough for you to kind of work with it in your own way. Like, if I was studying this on my own, I wouldn't necessarily do the exercises that are in the textbook. I would perhaps stick to the workbook exercises and then do my own like sentence mining and maybe like flashcard system, or perhaps like writing down a sentence and trying to make my own version, or doing like a journal / like writing entry response to what I'm reading. So I would come up with my own exercises perhaps instead of following the ones that are in that book. I also want to say that in regards to the workbook, the exercises themselves are actually very, very boring, and the only thing that brings down the B1, B2 ranking for me is actually vocabulary relevance, and that's because if you're not a university student, then the vocabulary can be quite like superfluous or not so useful to you at this beginning stage when you are trying to grasp the language and start using it. Like, a lot of people think B1, B2 is not a lot, and that C1, C2 means you're speaking, but I really beg to differ that B1, B2 is when you start to be conversationally fluent, which means that the vocabulary really has to kind of hit the mark on what your lifestyle is like, what you want to use, like very practical vocabulary. And definitely Rivstart is targeted to students who are trying to study academically in Sweden, so that is a drawback. And I also just hate monotonous workbook exercises, but Swedish has a lot of random rules, just like English, that you can't skip over. Like, the rules are actually really important despite being really freaking annoying. So even though I don't like the sentences or like the vocabulary settings that they necessarily chose for the workbook, I feel like it was a necessary evil for me to get to the next stage, and I would do it again if I really had a serious goal of improving my Swedish. We're on the last book, the B2C1 book. Now, in terms of the content, at this level, it's mostly working with texts and content themes and ideas and learning how to formulate them in a very accepted way, in an adult way. They have these writing goals where it just says skriv, like write, and then how to write a reference sheet, and how to describe a process or something like that. And so here it's trying to take your language skills from conversationally proficient or day-to-day proficient to, can you do a job in Swedish? Can you do something like professional, whether that's work or academia or a blog? Like, can you produce a good piece of text? Can you produce a good email? Can you produce, this sort of thing? And I mean, at this level, really what you're worried about is the content and the thought provokers that really get you, and perhaps like examples of good texts. And I truly think that this is a good textbook. I love the topics. All of the topics are really relevant to Swedish society, relevant to the world right now. There's a lot of stuff on the environment. There's a lot of stuff on like gender studies and things like that. So I really enjoyed this textbook a lot, but once again, I mean, the way that they write down exercises is so goddamn boring. Like, it's just a little bit of text with people like, it's just a little bit of like, how can I be motivated to do an exercise? Like, there's no space for me to think. I mean, the font itself makes me want to fall. So, like, I take away self-study optimization points for this, because as a self-studier, I need more motivation to do the exercises. Otherwise, it's just gonna look boring and I'm gonna make up my own shit, which defeats the purpose of buying a textbook. But in terms of structure, vocabulary, relevance, and like my overall rating, I actually rate this one really high. And I think this is probably my favorites. Like, my two favorites are, I really liked the textbook actually, like textbook number 1, but also the workbook for this. And the workbook A1, A2. This is so damn sexy that, like, I mean, even as a advanced learner, I still reference this a lot, because it's the tiny little basic things that screw you up as an advanced learner as well. Like, it's not like I'm missing higher level something. I just make mistakes on basic stuff that I need to refresh every once in a while. So I will never throw this out. That's my overall thoughts. And the B1, B2 is not bad as well, as I already told you, but I'm obsessed with these two. I think we can talk about comprehensibility overall for the textbook series, and that is how easy is it to understand the directions, the explanations, etc. of Rivstart. And honestly, I'm gonna have to rate this pretty low. I'm gonna give it like a 2.5 stars out of 5 because they barely explain anything. Like, they'll just give you a table and be like, here it is, and there's lots of grammar words that you've maybe never heard of, and they're all in Swedish. So I mean, there's some stuff that's kind of difficult to understand, so you might need some supplementary information as you're going by. One of the reasons this is a series that I recommend, I have tried other books. I've tried Swedish for Professionals, I've tried Form i Fokus, I've tried a few others, but the reason why this is the one that I recommend is still it has the best structure to take you throughout the levels. It also aligns with the CEFR system, so if you ever want to take an exam, it's the best one to go with. This is the set of books that they use when they do Swedish courses or intensive courses here in Sweden, so if you wanted to pass those tests, you also should be using these. And then finally, simply because I don't think there are that many good textbooks out there for Swedish. Honestly, I think they're all pretty shitty for self-study learners. For what is here, this is pretty good. But it's important to really understand the fallbacks of the textbooks so that you can supplement those negative aspects with other things. Like, I watched a lot of TikToks, a lot of YouTubers, I looked at a lot of tutorials and blog posts, etc. about specific points. So let's say, you know, you're learning about huvudsats, or like you're learning about clause replacements or adverbials or something like this, some grammar techie stuff, and in this textbook it's freaking confusing. You can at least know that, okay, it's okay that it's confusing, it's not me, I'm gonna Google this specific section and see if I can get a better explanation. I have some printables that I actually created for myself to learn Swedish better, so in the coming weeks I'm gonna be uploading them to our shop. So if you're interested in that, make sure to join our newsletter, where we send you an email once a week about language learning and what's going on with the 𝕙𝕣𝕣 global community. We also have like a free community where you can also talk with other Swedish learners and ask questions. I'm also there, you can totally be there and even tag me if you have a question. You can check us out, it's completely free. We have over 1,000 members. Join. I hope this video was helpful for you guys. I actually had a lot of fun reviewing them. I keep forgetting how much fun I have thinking about languages. You'd think that when you're a polyglot who speaks 7 languages, you wouldn't forget that you enjoy languages, but sometimes I do, and it's a pleasant surprise.